everybody? Welcome inside the Indiana Convention Center here at the NFL Combine. Matthew Coller along with Chris Trapasso. The show, as always, presented by FanDuel. And Chris, we're here again. This is the, I think, fourth time that we have attended the NFL Combine together. And here on our first day, we're going to talk about the biggest storylines of the NFL Combine and things that we're looking for the Vikings and also around the NFL. But welcome back. You are the official draft analyst of Purple Insider, and wonderful to have you back breaking down the draft for us this year.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me. It's always fun to get together here. We do all the Zoom or StreamYards. To be able to meet in person and talk and have these podcasts every week is really fun. Didn't get a ton of buzz last night. Everyone was kind of filtering in, and that blizzard in the Northeast kind of delayed a lot of flights. Mine was delayed. Not that Buffalo was exactly where the blizzard happened, but a lot of residual delays from earlier. And it's going to be a really fun combine because, and can kind of bleed into the biggest storylines, the quarterback class stinks. So normally it's what's the biggest storyline? Oh, it's, which quarterback will throw, who's going to have a better throwing session, talk better. There is like essentially zero buzz for the quarterbacks, which means other positions are ripe to take the biggest storyline away from this Indianapolis Combine and be, whether it's the safeties, whether it's the edge rushers, corners, it's a class that is going to not be headlined by the quarterback position.
So I've made a list of the biggest things that we're going to be looking for. And I think number one actually is the quarterback position, but it's not in the draft.
Yeah.
It is in the free agent conversation. I saw just yesterday, NFL.com made their list of 100 top free agents, and number one is Malik Willis. But we also have, just already today, the general manager of the Falcons said that they are for sure cutting Kirk Cousins. So where is he going to end up? Where is Kyler Murray going to go? And this is certainly a week for all the NFL insiders to be out talking to folks. You and I will as well tonight to see what we can find out about where these quarterbacks are going. I think that is a huge storyline here of just trying to figure out which teams are looking for what. Are the Vikings looking for a starting quarterback? Are they looking for somebody to compete with J.J. McCarthy? Would they go down the Derek Carr road? There's so many different potential options, but also it's sort of a game of musical chairs where you have the Jets are looking, the Cardinals are looking, the Dolphins are looking, the Cleveland Browns. I mean, there's a lot to sort out here with the quarterback situation. The fact that there is not a clear-cut, hey, here's the 5 quarterbacks that are going to be drafted in the first round. I mean, that adds so much intrigue to the quarterback carousel.
Yeah, and then leading into this week, I knew that we were going to have this podcast and kind of set the scene. And free agency is something that gets talked about a lot here because that's obviously what's coming up right around the corner in early March. In talking to people before I got to Indy, it was like an even split of what the Dolphins are going to do with Tua Tagovailoa. Mm-hmm. It would be a huge dead cap hit. They already took on almost $60 million by cutting Bradley Chubb and a few others. Do they find a suitor to be able to trade for Tua Tagovailoa, who I think we all realize at this point has a ceiling that's not even a top 10 quarterback in the league, but he's a serviceable starter in the right situation. He led the league in passer rating just a few years ago. He's kind of that dark horse name that might not excite a lot of fan bases, but ultimately, if he does have to play in 2026, can be a good bridge starter to a younger player, or maybe even just beat out a younger quarterback and be that floor level quarterback that is not going to necessarily tank your season, but may not get you to a Super Bowl either.
And I wonder about Tua, if there's anyone who's really interested, because I haven't had him on any of the lists for the Vikings. Naturally, Brian Flores is here. I don't think that's where he would want to land. But I also think that teams would look at him and say, this is a guy who has had a lot of injuries, whose play has regressed big time, and does not have a physical upside. Like when we look at the quarterbacks that have kind of revamped their careers at some point after being top picks. Well, Baker Mayfield has a huge arm, or Sam Darnold has a huge arm, or Geno Smith, the same thing. With Tua, it feels like you have to play a certain type of way. Mm-hmm. And then there's the connection with Miami and Malik Willis, Jeff Hafley coming from Green Bay. But then there's also the LaFleur connection in Arizona to Malik Willis. And how much is he actually going to get paid? This is the place here in Indianapolis where the teams meet meet with all of the agents.
Absolutely.
So they're going to be in those rooms having that discussion with Malik Willis. Like, what are you looking for? How much money do you think that you're worth after throwing less than 100 passes as a Green Bay Packer? But they were good passes. Yes. There was a lot of really good passes there. Here's the connection to the draft and the combine is Ty Simpson. And I know that in years past, I have been kind of the skeptical person on certain quarterback prospects, that it feels like the draft Illuminati is trying to foist upon us. And that was Shadur Sanders, check. That was Will Levis, check.
Spencer Rattler.
That was Spencer Rattler, check. And I've got Ty Simpson in that same category as somebody that everyone's going to do their big film breakdown. He's going to throw here. There's going to be a ton of focus on what does it look like? Can he get into that first round? I do not see it with him as a first round player. I see him as much more of like a second or third round type of project for somebody to develop over a couple of years. He only threw like 300 passes in college. Always a red flag for me. But do you think that Ty Simpson can work his name into this quarterback carousel discussion?
Absolutely. And not that it's necessarily justified, but what you just outlined, the draft Illuminati always pushing quarterbacks and kind of inflating them higher than they should be, artificially inflating them. He feels like that classic quarterback in this class. And anyone that has followed me on this show for the last 5 or 6 years, I always evaluate quarterbacks first because I do not want to have any buzz. Oh, look, great throwing session at the combine, or there's a lot of buzz for him in this scouting department. I watched Ty Simpson. I liked him, but I felt exactly how you did. That, okay, highest positional value, second or third round. He has upside because you can look at the 300 passes in college and say he's not a finished product, and that can be a negative or a positive. But in no way, shape, or form in any other of the last 5 to 7 classes, maybe outside of 2022 that had the Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, outside of that class, he would not be a first-round pick. So he will be the one that I do think, because of the scarcity at the position in this draft class and in free agency, he will probably ultimately go in the first round.
I'm skeptical on that. I just feel like when you have a first round investment, even if it's the back or middle of the first round, it is such a big commitment for a franchise to make. It's like, that is your guy. Even if it is a Kenny Pickett who's drafted in the 20s, it's still treated that way. He's your first round quarterback. He is your guy.
A long leash.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then you feel like you have to work him into the game. He has to get his true opportunity, because if he doesn't, then why did you spend a first round draft pick on this quarterback? That's why I think teams kind of hesitate. I mean, even we saw, someone like Tyler Shuck drop to the second round, where clearly there was some people in the league that liked him more than maybe the draft analysts, but still it was like, he was like 26 years old, and maybe there's too much of a commitment to say you're going to be our franchise guy. It's more of a dice roll, and I think that Ty Simpson is that. So if you're those QB needy teams, I don't know that you're going to Ty Simpson to be the guy who's supposed to, be your franchise first round quarterback.
By the way, to kind of tie this all together, we said that Tua doesn't really have the physical upside. To tie that conversation into this one, Ty Simpson is a pretty high floor, low upside quarterback. With Tyler Shuck, to tie him in, he didn't necessarily have upside because he was 26, but big arm and very athletic. So I think that's why he ultimately didn't go in the first round, but went higher than a lot of the draft analysts thought. And it's not a one-to-one comparison, because Ty Simpson does not have a monster arm, and he's not going to run rampant, as a scrambler in the NFL. So there is a little difference between those two. I'm not going to say that I'm positive that Ty Simpson will be a first rounder, and maybe it will be the latest media construct that could Ty Simpson be a first rounder when he really is probably a day 2 or even early day 3 pick.
I do want to ask you about a couple more quarterback things before we move on to some other positions that we're going to keep an eye on and so forth. With circling back to Malik Willis, what do you think is the best option? Because, we talked a lot about Malik Willis, and I know that you liked him coming out of the draft as a potential top draft pick that would need time to develop, which to me always means not top draft pick, because there is no time in the NFL unless you're in Green Bay, which they, seem to always figure out how to do this. If you were advising Malik Willis what to do, what would you tell him, like where he should go, what kind of contract he should look for? Because the buzz seems to be growing more and more that he's going to be offered some pretty significant money, but some of the teams that are looking for solutions, maybe not in the best positions to help out a quarterback thrive.
So I understand, and that you referenced earlier that he has the connection with Jeff Hafley. Like, I understand that. If I'm advising Malik Willis, I don't know how I can tell him to go to the Miami Dolphins. They probably more so than any other team we've seen the last 3 to 5 years, and things can change rapidly in the NFL, but more than any other team the last 3 to 5 years, the Dolphins are absolutely rebuilding. They're going to have so much dead cap this year. You look at the roster, and it's Jalen Waddle and not a lot else. The offensive line isn't very good. I think maybe you can get the most money there, but because I think that they're absolutely desperate to have some semblance of excitement at the quarterback spot. But if you're looking at, hey, I'm still pretty young, I want to prolong my career, I want to have sustained success, I want to get a third contract, it's not going to the Dolphins. I think Arizona Cardinals would make a little bit more sense, although in general, the teams that are pretty close are usually in that draft realm of, hey, we're just going to pick our quarterback in the draft. We're going to have great players around him, spend money on those players while we have the cheap quarterback contract. You wouldn't be getting that in Miami or Arizona, but I think just looking at the rosters and how close those teams are to competing in their even respective divisions, you would have to go, and obviously the Seahawks just won the Super Bowl, but the Cardinals, I think, are better fit to create an environment conducive to success for the quarterback spot.
Yeah, I think the system, number one, is going to have similar roots,
For sure.
Clearly, because of the LaFleurs, but also they have people to throw to. I mean, they have a former top draft pick in Marvin Harrison. Michael Wilson has emerged as a pretty solid player. And Trey McBride is a premier tight end in the NFL. At least you have a starting point of some things. I would argue that's one of the worst organizations in football, though. I think the way that they handled even the situation with Jonathan Gannon, you hire him, he gets you to a 500 record, then it seemed like to me they kind of forced him to bench Kyler Murray after he had that injury and they started to fade, and then you go to the bottom and fire him, and you're hiring and firing coaches, you're drafting quarterbacks, you're getting rid of it feels like it's not
that's part of it.
a great organization overall, but at least he would have some people to throw to. I think that the Vikings should at least consider making some sort of pitch to him about Minnesota, because yes, you're not going to get $40 million a year here, but you could get much more in the future were you to throw to Justin Jefferson. I do have some concerns even now about Willis, and like he throws the ball extremely well now compared to what he did in Liberty, but did they work the offense around him a little bit more than KOC would want to? Is it too much of a small sample size to make a big bet on him if you're the Minnesota Vikings? Can you make it work cap-wise? I like the idea overall because there's upside there, but I think in terms of being realistic, it's a little bit tough. I need to get your kind of take on where they stand with J.J. McCarthy before we move on to some of the draft stuff, because there is an argument for going out and getting a new starting quarterback, the roster, the locker room, the pressure on KOC, the expectations, the money spent by ownership. It's hard to take a risk of just running back a quarterback that struggled to stay healthy and struggled when he was on the field as much as J.J. McCarthy. But is it the right thing for them to get a different starting quarterback for this year and say, look, we tried with McCarthy, or would it be better to get someone who's just competition for him, that if he loses the competition, then okay, fair enough, but still gives him an open door to potentially win a competition?
Yeah, I think at this point, you can't just totally punt on J.J. McCarthy and say, all right, we've seen enough, you're done. Like with the injuries, and they would know behind the scenes, like how much the injury impacted him. And I remember we talked about he lost so much weight and he had to get up conditioning wise and get back to a normal starting quarterback weight or where he was at Michigan. I do think, of course, that they should be looking at veteran options. And I'm on this Vikings podcast and I didn't even reference Malik Willis to the Vikings would make a lot of sense. Now, again, if I was advising him, which was what your question was, I don't know if I would say that because I don't know, like you said, the finances might not be the most that he can get. But in terms of upside, it absolutely is there for Willis to try to win a quarterback battle. And if we're just not only rooting for J.J. McCarthy, but much more want the Vikings to just play good football. I think that situation would help get the best out of J.J. McCarthy, would allow KOC to tap into something he hasn't been able to utilize, is the designed run game in that offense. And really, it's funny that we only saw like 100 throws from Malik Willis in Green Bay, but I think since we talked about Trey Lance and Mac Jones in 2021, I want to see a highly mobile quarterback in this Kyle Shanahan tree system. We just haven't seen it. And maybe that is by design, and that a lot of these coaches that are from that coaching tree like just the pocket passers. But I do think exactly what the scouting report was on Willis, go somewhere. I mean, he started in Tennessee, but the last 2 years in Green Bay, he got that development from a very quarterback-friendly head coach. He was behind Jordan Love, who was also raw himself and really kind of honed in his decision-making and his accuracy. Now he's developed. Now this would be the time to say, hey, you can come in and you're going to actually give us a higher floor than J.J. McCarthy. And oh, by the way, if McCarthy ultimately beats you out in a quarterback battle, that's a great sign for the Vikings organization.
Yeah, and ideally that would be something that you'd be able to do, right? Would be, hey, bring in a Malik Willis. Now, this is in a rational world. Bring in a Malik Willis who's had a small sample size of success, have the two battle it out, and then the best man wins. But since there are other teams that are so quarterback desperate, if you're signing Malik Willis, you're really telling him you are QB1. We are done with J.J. McCarthy. In fact, at that point, you should probably trade J.J. McCarthy, and that sends us down a whole nother rabbit hole of things where
spot.
I don't think that they're ready to bail on him to the point where they're going to trade him. I think what they'd rather do is maybe have him compete with someone or have him on the bench behind a veteran, an Aaron Rodgers, a Derek Carr, a Kirk Cousins. I think that's what they want, to see if he can develop. But also, we're going to find out what they want by the moves that they make here in the coming weeks. But Malik Willis, I think, has the most intrigue of any quarterback in the offseason. He's almost like replaced the draftable quarterback as the guy with the most interest. Let me ask you about this draft. Now, going into it, the major talking point was it's not a very good draft. It's not very deep. There's only a handful of players, and maybe someone who in previous years would have been drafted 18th was going to get drafted 8th this year. Do you think that this week has the potential to raise enough stocks at the top of the draft for us to change our tune about this draft and start saying, you know what? Maybe there's a little more talent, because I feel like that's what happens all the time. Well, there's only about 12 true first-round draft picks, and then we get through the combine. Everybody talks about them, and then they're like, no, I actually can't wait to get this guy at number 23. And I think about last year when we came to the combine, you and I discussed Nick Emanware quite a bit, and then he destroyed the combine. Now, he didn't get drafted in the first round, but he ends up becoming a star player. I mean, I think that there's those types of guys that could emerge here and surprise us. I just don't know who those guys are. So, I mean, what your thought on, could we be talking about more depth in this draft than we were going into it?
Absolutely. I think 100% that's great for you to anchor this week with that statement, because it does seem to happen almost every year, unless you're in I don't want to say decade, but once every 7 to 8 years where there's a lot of like marquee household names. And I think this ultimately happens for 3 reasons. Number one, we get those blanket statements early in the draft process, which for the majority of the league starts in January, whether you don't make the playoffs or you're out of the playoffs early, because a lot of people just haven't had time to watch the prospects yet and actually evaluate them. Number two, like I mentioned before, the quarterbacks. If you don't have a really beefy quarterback class, it's, this class is not very good. And then number 3, and I'm going to go back to your longtime statement that wide receiver is the second most important position on the field. It has become a position that we've seen financially explode over the last 5 to 7 years. There's going to be receivers that are getting $35, $40 million pretty soon. That if you don't have the marquee wide receivers at the top, the Jamar Chases, the Jalen Waddle types, the Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., that are household names that everyone knows are going to be top 5 picks, you go into this week at the combine thinking, oh, this class is not very good. I've watched like 90 players so far, evaluated them. The safety class is the best I've ever scouted. The edge class is incredibly deep. I think offensive tackle is actually pretty good. And wide receiver doesn't have that Malik Neighbors type, but I think we could see 5 or 6 wide receivers go in the first round like we did 2 years ago in 2024.
Okay, so there's a couple things that I can jump off there of interest to the Minnesota Vikings. Let's start with your statement about the safeties because there's Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, there's Dylan Thieneman, and this goes along with, of course, Caleb Downs, who I have no even hopes and dreams of the Minnesota Vikings getting after watching a lot of that guy play football. There would be no better replacement for Harrison Smith than Caleb Downs, but unfortunately, the Vikings won too many football games. So let's talk about and then also AJ Hawley. Is it Hawley from LSU? So those guys, Thieneman, McNeil-Warren, and Hawley, I think they have a chance here in Indianapolis to separate themselves. When I look at the profile of Thieneman, it makes a lot of sense for Brian Flores. It's played multiple positions. It's kind of a quarterback on the field. But when I watch a little of McNeil-Warren, he has the chance to kind of be the Eamon Ware of he's going to show up and blow up this thing. I don't know a lot about AJ Hawley. So assess those 3 for me. Could we see 3, 4 first-round draft pick safeties, or do you think that the NFL is still going to look at that position and say that's more of a second-round spot?
I do think that we have to consider the financial disparity, like the bonus that you get in terms of the top of the safety class or the top of the safety position financially in free agency, like how much money they get compared to how much you're going to pay a first-rounder, and I think that's why we don't. That is part of the reason that doesn't get talked about a lot. Why we haven't seen a ton of off-ball linebackers go in the first round. Why we don't see a lot of safeties or a lot of tight ends, because you're just not getting that big gulf that you get at quarterback, obviously, or receiver or edge. I do think your comment that we could see 3 or 4 safeties going, or at least test to a first-round level, like you just mentioned. Eamon Ware tested like a top 5 overall pick and went pick 34, 35, and was sensational. He should have been a first rounder. I think this safety class has, beyond Caleb Downs, 3 or 4 candidates that we will certainly be monitoring this week to see, do they have the 40-inch vertical? Do they run sub 4.5? Because the film for McNeil-Warren, Halsey, even Kamari Ramsey from USC, Bud Clark, who's an older prospect from TCU, ton of interceptions, and I absolutely love Jalen Husky, who's a former corner at Bowling Green, transitioned to safety at Maryland. He looks like a freak on film, very rangy, and I love Dylan Thieneman. He's actually my number 1 safety coming in to this class over Caleb Downs, mostly because of traits, because Thieneman, I think, is going to be bigger, more explosive, and faster than Caleb Downs, who can do everything on the field. But I think because of that statement, and a lot of people love these safeties, there will be a lot of comparisons to how do they test compared to Caleb Downs. Is Caleb Downs far and away just the best athlete? Or are there some others who might not have as good of film as Caleb Downs at Ohio State and Alabama, but can test through the roof? So it's a really fascinating safety class at a position that's not valued financially a ton in the NFL today, but I still think you look around the best defenses in the league, they usually have at least 1 or 2 good safeties.
Well, and that made me think about, Eamon Ware, and the reason to bring him up is that, I don't know if you ever heard this before, Chris. I'm going to provide some real insight for you. It's a copycat league.
Oh, I've heard that.
Yes. Yeah. And look, these teams, they do what you do and what we do, which is they look at who won the Super Bowl and they go, how were they constructed? What did they have? And it is true that when you go through a lot of the successful teams in the NFL and successful defenses, this has certainly been true for the Minnesota Vikings. They often have really good safeties. You can think of them, your Cam Chancellors or Earl Thomases of like the great defenses, the Ed Reeds, the Troy Polamalu's. But that is a little bit of the point, though, is that the guy probably has to be great. So if the Vikings were to spend the 18th overall draft pick on a safety, would they be convinced that McNeil-Warren or Thieneman can be great? That's the question.
I think they can. I mean, they're felt like this is not, oh man, this guy looks fast on film. Let's see if he tests well. And you're taking a gamble on a highly athletic safety prospect. McNeil-Warren was the Eamon Ware of the MAC. He was making plays underneath, pick-sixing passes in the flat. He was routinely flying downhill ton of tackles. He changes directions outstandingly. Halsey was more of a slot defender at LSU, but we know how important that role is in today's NFL. I don't know if he's going to test to that level. Thieneman was a ball magnet at Purdue and then goes to goes to Oregon. I was going to say goes to the Pac-12 and was really, really good this past season for the Oregon Ducks. And you see that high-level athleticism there as well. So I think, yes, all of these players are not just the workout warrior types. You watch the film, and that's why there's a lot of buzz for the safety class. Let's see how they test, but the film as a foundation is all outstanding for a lot of these top safety prospects.
Right, and maybe a chance here to solidify themselves as somebody that's worth a draft pick that high. We also know that the Vikings in positional value have not always really matched up. I mean, they have taken a safety in the first round. It didn't work out, but they have taken guards high multiple times over the last number of years. But we don't know how Kevin O'Connell, Brian Flores are viewing this. I think if you're Flores, if you lose Harrison Smith, then you're certainly making a strong case for a first-round safety, even if it's not a traditional value position. Let's talk about wide receiver, because as you know, the official position of Purple Insider, always and forever, is draft a wide receiver. If you need a receiver, draft a receiver. If you don't need a receiver, let me think, draft a receiver. The first round seems to be pretty well stocked, but something that has happened in years past is somebody will sort of slip through the cracks and be a second-round draft pick. Good ones. Can you wait if you're the Vikings? Because I think when you look at losing Jalen Naylor potentially to free agency, and then with off-field issues with Jordan Addison, I mean, Addison's a guy you'd love to sign to a 5-year contract extension for $20-something million a year or whatever, but I don't know how you can do that with concerns off the field. Even giving him a 5th-year option feels like a little bit on the dicey side. So if they were to be thinking long-term about the wide receiver position, where, do you have to do it in the first? Do you think there's enough depth in this draft to do it in the second? And who are you most intrigued by here in Indy?
Absolutely. I think this is more it would be smarter to wait. I think it's a very good wide receiver class. Do I think that Mekhi Lemon and Jordan Tyson, maybe Carnell Tate to a certain degree because he seems super explosive, would they all be surefire top half of the first round picks in any class? No. Will they go there because it's receiver? Yes. Is it a very valuable position? Absolutely. I guess this is kind of why we're talking about this before these guys work out. We got to see how they test. Yeah. Is Mekhi Lemon a low 4.5 guy with 34 to 36 inch vertical, or is he a sub 4.5 guy with close to a 40 inch vertical? What's his 3 cone like? Because he looks really shifty on film, but he does look kind of small and stocky, and that's not the exact athletic frame that we normally see the really fast and explosive times. So I think Ted Hurst from Georgia State is a big-bodied wide receiver that moves extremely well. He's someone that, obviously, coming from Georgia State, he was at the Senior Bowl. We want to see how he works out here in Indy compared to his contemporaries. There is Denzel Boston from Washington. He's going to be one of the bigger wide receivers in this class that is that rebounder down the field. Only had, I think, 5 drops in his 4 years of college at Washington. Very good in contested catch situations. How is he going to test? So I do think there are a lot of names that will be able to kind of crystallize, all right, he's probably a first rounder, he's probably a second rounder, but I've watched 20 plus wide receivers, and I like a lot more who feel right now to be early to mid day 2 prospects that can, I think, become really good pros. And like you mentioned, there's a long list, a history of day 2, second and third round wide receivers who have become legitimate number 1 types in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, even just the first ones that come to mind are like Deebo Samuel, A.J. Brown. We're in the same draft class. It does tend to happen. I think the Vikings should be looking in that area in the second and the third round, but it's hard to sort out the needs and where do you put wide receiver, because it's maybe a less immediate need if they're not going to trade as somebody, but you can't really count on that for sure, and usually it's the elite talents that push the needle the most at any position. Defensive tackle seems to be a great position to discuss in this draft because the Vikings, again, could move on from Javon Hargrave and decide to take a first-round defensive tackle. Peter Woods seems to be the one that's being talked about the most as the widest range of potential outcomes, where someone could see him as a top 10-ish type of draft pick, or maybe in the back end of the first round. You also have Caleb Banks, who missed a lot of time. And he's like 6'6" and 320. I mean, he's like your typical guy that you would draw up in a lab.
Yes.
But he has the injury, and then where is the production? It's okay, but it's not mind-blowing. You've got a lot of run stuffers in this draft, like McDonald or Miller. I mean, I've seen so many different mocks and big boards with these guys all over the place. So how do you assess the defensive tackle group going into the workouts here?
It's not a great class if you want that penetrator, that Kalijah Cansey, the Ed Oliver, the obviously Aaron Donald type. There's not anyone that's coming in with that type of buzz, like, oh, he's going to test through the roof, and we envision him as a 7 to 10 sack, 40 to 60 to 70 pressure type defensive tackle. But like you were hinting at, it is a very good run stopper class, which you and I have talked about this with positional value. I personally would not, and I'm pretty sure you agree, I would not be running a pick to the podium to pick a really good run stopper in the first round.
Yep.
Because, and I haven't gotten 20 or 30 defensive tackles deep, but I'm telling you, every single year, 4th to 7th round, you can get a 6'2", 315 to 330 pound defensive tackle that's good against the run. He just is being picked there because he wasn't a great pass rusher. So we will certainly see defensive tackles go in this first round. And to talk quickly about Peter Woods, I think you're seeing the widest range of outcomes for him because he was that monster recruit at Clemson. He's going to be like 6'3", 6'4", 310 to 320, like that kind of built into lab size. And with that size, can play up and down the defensive line, but he never quite had the production and never became this, oh, he's Dexter Lawrence or he's even Christian Wilkins, to use other former Clemson players. So will a team fall in love with his upside, or will teams be scared away by why was he not more productive? At 18 years old, he looked like the number one recruit in the country and played well at Clemson, but was never someone that was truly dominant. And is he a two-gapper? Is he good up the field? Kind of. Is he good against the run? Kind of. So Peter Woods, I liked him on film. I think he was my number 5 defensive tackle coming in to this defensive tackle class. Some people might have him at number 1 because he's a specimen, and others may have him lower than that. So Peter Woods is someone, check the combine and then go back and watch the film, because it's not an overwhelmingly dominant player, but the combine can, like we have certainly seen, can elevate players very early in the draft.
So I've been doing draft simulations. I know, shocking stuff, right?
We'll do a lot, too, the next couple
And I know,
weeks.
we're going to do one, almost every show, probably, because there's so many different ways that they can go. So I don't know if you've done an official Chris Trapasso mock yet.
I haven't.
You have not. Okay, so as you think about maybe your first post-combine mock, or if you were doing a pre-combine, who would you have going to the Minnesota Vikings?
One of the safeties. I think the safeties are that good, and I don't know what the future holds for Harrison Smith. Is he going to come back? Is he not? But I think I feel like we've been talking about it for the last 5 years.
Yes,
like,
for sure.
Oh, is he coming back? And then he comes back and he still plays pretty well. But at this point, into his mid-30s at this point, right?
Yeah.
Or like late 30s?
Late 30s,
Late 30s at safety, which is incredible. It's like Terrence Newman 2.0, that you have to plan for the future at that position. And for as much as I said that there's the financial element where teams want a bigger bonus to draft these players at offensive tackle, at receiver, at quarterback, obviously, than safety or linebacker. I think in Brian Flores' defense, safety has a higher positional value than almost every other defensive scheme in the NFL. So now, you said there's no way that Caleb Downs could fall to them, but remember, Derwin James was the 17th overall pick, and everyone adored Derwin James. I remember in that 2018 draft being here, and everyone thought he would be a top 5 to top 10 pick. He slips all the way to 17. He did have an injury, so maybe that was it, but it's crazier things have happened in the NFL draft, and even if the Vikings in the middle of the first round are picking the second safety off the board, I think it is that good of a class to not get narrowly focused on Caleb Downs as this transcendent prospect. There are outstanding safeties outside of him.
I guess I broke my own rule there of not saying never could happen, because we've said that plenty of times. And even, Kyle Hamilton was projected by a lot of
Yeah, he
people
was picked late too.
top 10 pick, and much later than he was projected. And I think I went through this for the last 5-7 years. Safety is a position that almost always is taken lower than the consensus. So that will be something to keep an eye on there. And I guess you should never say never when it comes to the NFL draft. Give me 2 or 3 other teams here at the Combine outside of the Minnesota Vikings that have your attention. Who are you super intrigued by, what they're going to be thinking, what they could potentially do? Because we know the Raiders, if you go look on FanDuel, Fernando Mendoza is minus 20,000 to go number 1 overall, which I think is very reasonable considering that, he's locked in to that pick. But who else are you thinking about? I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what they need. And they could change their, outlook with X, Y, or Z. Without quarterback in the mix, it feels like this is a harder question probably to ask.
Well, how about the team right after the Raiders, the Jets? They have 2 top half of the first round picks. They have the second selection, I think 12 or 13, somewhere in that range. That is a roster that is decimated. You look at that roster and especially with Breece Hall hitting free agency, it's Garrett Wilson and not a lot else. I know they don't have Sauce Gardner anymore. They're going to lose some other free agents on the defensive side. Quincy Williams is also a free agent. Quinnen Williams is gone. A lot of those stars from those really pesky Jets defenses on bad teams the last few years are no longer there. So do they prioritize more defense? Do they try to give Aaron Glenn those guys on that side of the ball where his specialty lies? Or do they say, we need a Ty Simpson, or we need, and you could also factor this in. Are they in the free agent quarterback market? What do they do? They're a team that I think with 2 first rounders and a litany of important needs at almost every key premium position, that's the team that I'm most forward to seeing how they approach the next couple weeks when it comes to free agency. How much do they spend? They have a decent amount of money, and what they ultimately do in late April with those 2 first rounders, very fascinating. And then I'll stay in the NFC North. The Chicago Bears, I think a team that has a clear need at edge rusher. They have some more defensive needs than I think offensive needs, but I wonder in this draft with Ben Johnson as their head coach, they get the year 2 jump from Caleb Williams. Do they still say, well, we have the defensive needs, but let's maybe add more offensive line help because some of our offensive line pieces are a little bit older? Do we add even more firepower for Caleb Williams? It will be interesting to see how they approach this offseason. Is it strictly defensive heavy, which I think on paper it probably should be, or does the presence of Ben Johnson indicate, hey, we're going to continue to build and keep some bullets in the chamber for Caleb Williams?
And when you talk about the edge rusher position, a lot of times if you're drafting in the back half of the first, those guys need multiple years of development before they can become something. Do you go a little safer with a defensive tackle that might be able to transition quicker and impact quicker, but maybe the ceiling isn't as high, or a developmental edge type of player that's going to take a couple of years? We've seen this with Dallas Turner and Chop Robinson and lots of other guys that were drafted in the back end of the first round. Usually, if a guy is a freak edge rusher, he is at the very top. If he's flawed, then he's going to be in the middle or the late part. Not that, a Jared Verse can't happen, but just traditionally, that's kind of how it ends up working out. So I was going to say Chicago is one of the more interesting, because are they going to try to get a need? Are they going to try to, go and put more around Caleb Williams? They have, I think, multiple options. Also, I'm interested in teams that when the light goes on and it's green, go. Do you trade picks? Do you trade a first-round pick in a bad draft, I use finger quotes, draft to try to get a win now type of player? Because Chicago, now that Caleb Williams is at least capable of getting them into the playoffs and winning a playoff game, it's all systems go for them. So do they stick and pick? Do they do something else? I mean, it's a very interesting situation for them.
And especially, I'll also throw this in. There's been a lot of rumor about them potentially trading DJ Moore. And if they do that, I loved Luther Burden, and he certainly flashed when he was healthy. Obviously, Rome Odunze was a first-round pick just 2 years ago. Colston Loveland had a great rookie season. That changes the math a little bit, if they trade DJ Moore, they get some picks, they're probably not going to get a first rounder for him at this point. It probably would be maybe day 2 or 1 day 2 pick, 1 day 3 pick for DJ Moore, but that could maybe allow Ben Johnson to have some more runway to say, hey, we still need some more offense, which would then take away their ability to draft that elite level edge rusher. I will say about the edge class, you're absolutely right that usually the best finished products are picked really early at that position in round 1. I think the edge class is very similar to the wide receiver class, that there's not a Nick Bosa top 5 surefire talent outside of David Bailey from Texas Tech, but we could see 5 or 6 or 7 of them go in the first round. It's a really good class. And again, this is kind of the theme of this interview, have to see how they test in Indianapolis to just see if they're great prospects, not just good prospects, but also you can look back historically, and we'll certainly talk about it here on the show, that where specific workouts will slot them and where they have those type of workouts have historically gone first round, second round, or third round.
Chris Trapasso, the official draft analyst of Purple Insider, and we're going to be doing multiple shows here. Tomorrow it'll be what we're hearing in Indianapolis from being out and about, and also we'll get your reaction to things that have been said by KOC and Rob Brzezinski later on today. So, Chris, great to be here with you again, and man, I'm pumped. Another combine for us, so I'll talk to you very soon.
All right, football.
Football. Thanks, everybody.